Hi, I'll pick up where I left off in the last video on the chapter on the Mordent from Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach's Versuch über die wahre Art das Klavier zu spielen. Diese Manier liebt hinaufgehende oder springende Noten vorzüglich. Bei herunterspringenden kommt sie nicht so oft, bei fallenden Sekunden gar nicht vor. Sie lässt sich im Anfange, in der Mitte und am Ende eines Stückes finden. This paragraph ties in with the next and its examples, so I'll be connecting the two. Before I read the next paragraph and do that, I'll just say that the other mordent in the first section of the toccata, that occurs over an ascending note, an ascending second. So, in keeping with Bach saying there that it especially loves ascending notes. And I'd be wondering if the special way of performing the short mordent would be useful there too. It does seem to me to come ex abrupto, in that it comes without slurring, and the rhythmic kick it provides with its shortness or immediacy doesn't seem to me to go amiss in that situation. My reservation, though, would be that I'd be using it more than the other mordents, but I would wonder, and I'd be hesitant to rule it out. Maybe I wouldn't be using it more than the other mordents overall in the context of the whole piece. Would Johann Sebastian Bach have used it once at the start and again at the end of that section? Is this a practice Carl picked up from having seen his father use it? In the end, I could wonder that. And then again, I'd probably be thinking, okay, let's say I do want to follow Bach's advice and use it less often, which would mean using it twice in that one section is once too many. I think I might prefer it rather there at the end of that section, that it's more useful. And I've seen in other in editions that that short mordent is kind of given that accidental, which can be used to make it sharper, but I think that G sharp, it goes against the modulation. So I don't like using a G sharp with that mordent there at the end of that section. So if I was only able to use it once, I might reserve that special way of doing it for there, and just use the full resources of AC fingering to get that opening mordent as sharp as possible. While performing it the usual way. And perhaps that is the actual answer. That Johann Sebastian Bach used exactly that way of playing the short mordent that Carl described at the end of that section. That's where he did it. That might be the answer, and that might be the one I'd settle on. Also, I want to point out that in bar 7 of the Largo Maestoso, in Edition Shot's 1935 edition of the sonatas, there is a short mordent over the right hand D, over a falling second. And when we compare it to the first edition of the piece, which was published by the author and printed by C.F. Henning in 1753, we can see it wasn't necessarily an error on the part of Edition Shot, in the sense of Edition Shot simply being careless while copying it out. The sign for the short mordent is there. So the short mordent is there where Bach says it never occurs. With the information that a mordent never occurs with a falling second, we know to take notice of that when we see it and wonder, is it correct? When we look at the first edition, we can see the short mordent sign. What can also be seen is that the left hand B on the stave above that has the exact same latitude on the page as the D in question, or is directly above it. And given the lack of space over the B, the sign which was meant for over that note had to be written under it, making it look like it's been placed over the D. Anyone who watched the video called Newly Discovered Teaching from Mozart on K332 might remember the passage I read from paragraph 23 from the chapter on ornaments in general, where Bach talks of having to do such a thing. I saw that in the 1963 reissue by Edition Shot, this has been corrected, along with other mistakes from 1935 that were there as a result of mere negligence, like the missing A's in bar 5. And you see I had to write them in pencil. It's a very sloppy, edition. So, I played the short mordent. It can be heard there. It's owning up time. I often notice when something doesn't work. Here I didn't. So, I've been caught out. In my defense, I could argue that while the D, technically speaking, is indeed a falling second, given the brevity and relative lightness of the E and the weight of the Ds, that perhaps an exception might exist where that D, although being a falling second, exudes at the same time certain properties of a repeated note. I could argue that, but eventually I'd probably have to give in and acknowledge, when comparing bar 7 to bar 18, where that short mordent is absent, that Bach is correct and that it ultimately doesn't work, and that instead of the singing being enhanced, it's diluted, and that instead of music we get notes. The short mordent was never intended for the D. So my defense would be in relation to me being excused for not noticing it right off the bat. What we are examining in the comparison of the two bars requires a reasonably high level of perception, sensitivity, and critical thinking. And I think that leads to what I believe is a misapprehension that exists regarding Bach's Versuch, in that it is seen as, or is reduced to being, an account from Bach on how people played in 1753. That is not what this is. What it is Bach describing how a select few played, those who stood in a league apart from the roll of honour. The roll of honour played then like they do today. And this misapprehension results in that it is not treated with the appropriate seriousness and given the proper attention, as is proved by Grove. Instead of being all ears and hanging off its every word, people are approaching it as experts, as being too good for it, and they have a Lilliput attitude to being in the roll of honour, where in fact they should have approached it as novices, as people who don't belong to that league, but who would like to belong to that league. In other words, they should have approached it with humility. Bach said in his preface, "Nur wäre es zu wünschen, dass die Unterweisung auf diesem Instrumente hin und wieder etwas verbessert und das wahre Gute, welches, wie überhaupt in der Musik, also besonders auf dem Klaviere noch bisher bei wenigen anzutreffen gewesen ist, dadurch allgemeiner würde." It didn't happen. If anything, the instruction has gotten worse. And I'm referring to the Roll of Honour universities, to the master classes and everything beneath that. I'm not talking about, private teachers or something like that. I'm talking about the top people. The instruction they're giving is worse than the instruction Bach is talking about. It's gotten worse. You have people coming out of Juilliard, knowing nothing but notes and noise, totally clueless, zero. They've been raised on apples from the tree of knowledge, and that's it. The Bible, God says it's forbidden to eat the fruit from the tree of knowledge. They are being raised exclusively on fruits of the tree of knowledge, and they have all the information but none of the insight, none of the knowledge. The few Bach is talking about there, who are able to channel the true good in music, are those that are in a league of their own. His father, Mozart and Beethoven, would be three of those he's talking about. He's not talking about the Roll of Honour. Die vortrefflichsten Meister in der Ausübung, denen man etwas Gutes abhören könnte, sind noch nicht in so großer Anzahl zu finden, als man sich vielleicht einbilden dürfte. He's referring to the Roll of Honour. Those fast players by profession, the treffers who hit all the right notes. And to how the people then, just like now, will think of them when he talks about superior masters, of the Kissins and Sokolovs of their day. And that's why he says they're not as many as you might imagine, because there's always a relative plentiful number of the Roll of Honour. And the people then, just like now, if I said something like there's only a few, people will automatically think of the roll of honor. And Bach is not talking about them. They existed there, and he knows that's who the people then he's talking to will think of, and he's saying to them, they are not it. And I say Kissins and Sokolovs, and it's not to pick on Kissin and Sokolov, it's just, it's like a bit of a compliment, because I put them at the top of the roll of honor, which means, like a domino, I push them over and all the dominoes after them will fall. They're top of that league. Unfortunately, they don't qualify for the league that Bach is talking about, and that you can have a chance discovering what I am sharing in those how to play the piano videos, going through this, getting the knowledge, not just eating the apple from the tree of knowledge, but having a sense of the tree itself. That is all about getting into that league that the likes of Kissin and Sokolov don't qualify for. So, so they'll be thinking about them when he talks about superior masters, of the Kissins and Sokolovs of their day. And there's always a relative plentiful number of the roll of honor. Bach is saying they don't qualify. He'd say the exact same thing to you today, because he'd know you'd think of the roll of honor. Unfortunately, Bach said the superior masters are not yet to be found in such great numbers. He thought he was talking about a growing breed, that perhaps his contribution would have an effect. It did have an effect, but only on individuals, not on the movement. Instead, those superior masters, they turned out to be a dying breed he was talking about, teetering on the brink of extinction, constantly attacked and eventually eradicated by mediocrity. Das Abhören, eine Art erlaubten Diebstahls, aber ist in der Musik desto notwendiger, da, wenn auch die Abgunst unter den Menschen nicht so groß wäre, viele Sachen ausstoßen, die man kaum weisen, geschweige schreiben kann, und die man also vom bloßen Hören erlernen muss. So you have to listen to those people who are not in that roll of honor league, and that is me. Because what I'm presenting is demonstrations of the true way to play the piano. And my playing is a test for people on this piano, because people respond to the quality of the piano, they're not able to hear beyond the quality of the piano. I think those top class pianos have sort of spoiled people in that way, and not just the listeners but also the players. And the other thing is, you're not told how to hear good piano playing. You don't know. I went through the system, and I was going to concerts, and eventually I was sort of started getting honest with myself, and I'd listen to a recital, and then and it was, like of a top person, and I go, and afterwards, or in the intermission or whatever, the people would be talking about it, and you'd hear people talking about it, and they'd be all so sure about, oh, this was, how good or bad it was or whatever, and I never got that. And I know now, presenting the true way to play the piano, that the people don't have a clue what they're talking about. What they do is they know their recording or whatever of it, and if what they've heard is like that, then it's good, and if it's not like that, then it's bad. But they actually do not have a clue. And I started saying, I don't have a clue I don't know if that was good piano playing that I listened to, because I just didn't know. I wasn't told what to listen for. And I tell you what to listen for. What you do is you listen to the voice leading, the soprano, the bass and the middle voices. And when you listen to that, you'll start hearing all the notes. And when you hear all the notes, the key to hearing, to becoming aware of all the elements that belong to great piano playing, is listening to the length of the notes. And when you can hear the length of the note, then you will start to notice things like articulation. You'll start to hear the greater arc of the phrase. All that will start to come to your attention. And so that's the way. And I talked about an attentive listener, and an attentive listener, it's not excluding anybody out of that. Everybody can be an attentive listener. It's just like that. When somebody says, did you hear that? The first thing you ask is, hear what? You have to be told what to listen for, and nobody is told what to listen for who go through the system. So they're all just faking it, hoping they're never caught out. And mine is a test, and it catches them out. And a good way of a useful tool that's available with YouTube is if you listen to the pieces at twice the speed, and if you listen to the Roll of Honor playing the pieces at twice the speed, you'll hear the shaping of the phrase. You'll be able to hear more. You'll be able to hear, how you'll hear more obviously how there's only notes from the Roll of Honor, how they go through entire passages that are completely flat, that have no shape to them whatsoever. And you'll hear in mine that is not the case. You'll hear lots of things out of that, and it's a good way to kind of be able to hear what the attentive listener is able to discern without it gets more obvious. And if if that was me and I had been looking at these videos, and the person on the video said that it's not them playing, it's Mozart himself playing. And if I heard them saying that this is a demonstration of the true way to play the piano, what Bach is giving us, I'd be studying those. And you know what will happen when you start to study them, and when you start to listen to the voice leading and the length of the notes, when you become attentive to that, you will then become attentive to that in your own playing. You will start to notice the length of the notes, and you'll start listening out. You'll learn what to listen out for when you're acquiring it for yourself. So that's what that would achieve. And I don't know, I'd be doing that, but maybe that's why I escaped the cage, because that's the type of person I am. So if anybody else out there is that type of person, it could be something worth thinking about. And you could, let's say there's so many things that can be said, noticed, and if somebody doesn't notice them, they are not noticing 50 things, and it's too much that can be said, can be actually talked about generally. Not that it'd be impossible, but it would be a lot. And there are certain things, you can only hear them. Additionally, if one listens to Gustav Leonhardt, for example, so I'm not picking on him specifically. Thing is, the Roll of Honor, they all play the same. You listen to one, you might as well hear them all. They're all the same. But obviously that's what you want. I mean, I'm talking to, you know, the classical music audience are people, they're the same people who love McDonald's, you know, because it's always exactly the same all the time. They love that. They don't like individuality. But I don't believe that for them, you know, I know there are people out there who are interested in their own, who have a sense of their own individuality and want to express that and not be just a carbon copy of the next, you know, trained bird that comes along. So, if one listens to Gustav Leonhardt, for example, playing the Largo Maestoso with a similar attention to subtlety, one will also be able to hear how bad the Roll of Honour's incorrect way of playing the prowl trill and glancing brace actually is. And the good thing about his performance is that he took great care to play the completely incorrect versions as correctly as possible. So he can't be accused of deliberately trying to make it sound bad. And you might notice too, comparing my interpretation to his, how small everything is in the cage in Lilliput. And it makes no difference that he plays on a clavichord. The Roll of Honour as well, they have no, you know, you were going to see in this book, Bach telling the people of his day whose only instruments were the clavichord and the harpsichord. He is telling them that the singing on the instrument, the length of the tone is a lot longer than they think it is. I mean, the people themselves didn't understand their instruments. And the Roll of Honour today as well, they have a completely, they place too much on the instrument itself. And it reminds me of, you know, like when you're kids in a, you know, the best, you know, the best guitarist was the one with the best guitar. And it's like, it seems like that's what it is in authentic music. The best authentic players are the ones with the harpsichord or the clavichord. And there's no, absolutely zero understanding of their ability to actually produce the proper sound out of those instruments. If I was to play those instruments, they'll sound completely different than how all the Roll of Honour people play them. And the instrument has nothing to do with it. It's the same with Beethoven. With that, you know, where he'd say to hold down the sustaining pedal, and that the Roll of Honour experts, they say that that doesn't work on today's grand piano. So in their mind, they think it wasn't Beethoven at all. Like, Beethoven wasn't expressing an ability that he possessed because he was head and shoulders above all his peers. And he was able to do things with the instrument nobody was able to do back then. They think it was only because of the instrument, and that anybody was able to do what Beethoven instructed there, like at the, you know, at the end of that cadenza bit in the Appassionata in the first movement, that anybody was able to just leave the pedal down and play it and create that effect without it sounding like a mush. And that's what the experts think. It was only down to the piano, and it has nothing to do with the piano whatsoever. Yeah, so there's a lot too much placed on the instruments. Yeah, so I didn't demonstrate the incorrect way of playing the proud trill, but if you listen to Gustav Leonhardt, for example, you can hear how bad the incorrect way and how incorrect it is. I prove conclusively that it's incorrect, and it needs addressing. It's if the Roll of Honor have any self-respect, any standards, they'd address that. Because it's obviously wrong, and the longer it goes on, when it's been now established that it is 100% incorrect, the longer it goes uncorrected, the bigger the laughingstock that generation, that era is going to be. So back to the Largo Maestoso. There are other things I do differently to what Bach wanted. In bar 5, I play the brace from below slowly. And that was because of the bad quality of the D on this piano, which a brace from below played properly just accentuated. So I considered a slow brace from below to be the lesser of two evils. So I just want to say that while I'm at owning up, while I'm fessing up. Yeah. And in bar 2, I play a trill with an afterstroke instead of a long mordent. Since Edition Shot got the short mordent wrong, since it was written in over the D in bar 7, it was thus missing over the B in bar 2. That's what happened. There was one short mordent there, and it got put over the D. So as a result, it was missing over the B. And I didn't, a lot of new things happening for me when I recorded that, and I didn't know they were as bad as they actually were. Yeah, and so had it been there, I wouldn't have chosen the trill. I just want to say that. The afterstroke of the trill essentially took the place of the missing mordent. It was missing, and I felt it was missing, and so I filled that gap with the afterstroke from the trill. But I didn't know at the time the mordent was missing. So the whole thing, it doesn't please me. And while ultimately I only have myself to blame, plus I mistakenly took a manuscript on the International Music Score Library to be the manuscript of the pieces, when in fact it was just a copy, most likely of the first edition. So, and that's as well my fault. I didn't look properly, and I thought, so this, and it wasn't so tragic, because it was copied quite faithfully, but kind of irrelevant to what I would need it for. So, but so while I only have myself to blame, I do still see it as the combined forces of Lilliput doing everything in their power to undermine my efforts. And it's not just me they're doing it to. They're doing it to everybody. Yeah, so. And I wouldn't play. I didn't feel the long mordent worked in that bit, and I would challenge anybody to tell me that the trill is wrong. It's not what Bach wanted, it's not what Bach chose, but is that ornament incorrect there? Is that an incorrect place to have such a trill? And to get back to the paragraph, one will encounter the mordent at the beginning of a piece, at the end of it, and in the middle. Bach ends the first and third movement of that sonata with mordents, and he began the Largo Maestoso with a mordent. Sie hängt die geschleiften Noten, sie mögen gehen oder springen, ohne und mit einem Vorschlage zusammen. Figur 73. Dieses Verbinden geschieht am öftersten bei einer steigenden Sekunde. Dann und wann auch außerdem durch Vorschläge. Wenn der Mordent über einem Vorschlage von unten vor einem Sprunge sich finden lässt, A, so muss die Hauptnote lang sein, damit sie, so viel als nötig ist, von ihrer Geltung verlieren könne, diesen Vorschläge durch einen langen Mordenten einen Nachdruck zu geben. In diesem Falle verbindet und fühlt diese Manier zugleich. Bei den Rezitativen pflegt dieser Fall zuweilen vorzukommen. Bach said dieses Verbinden when referring to the legato or slurred notes, die geschleiften Noten of figure 73, the mordent hangs together. So, when he says ohne Verbindung in paragraph 3, kommt ex abrupto, das ist ohne Verbindung vor. One can compare the use of it there with this when figuring out what he means. We can also deduce from that the way of executing the short mordent as described in paragraph 3 is not to be used for any of the mordents featured in the examples of figure 73. He says this connecting happens mostly with an ascending second. And we can see that the F in the first example is an ascending second. And the C in the next is also an ascending second, or a steigende Sekunde. Again, it is the note before that determines what that note is. So it is the B before the C that makes that C an ascending second. And it is the E before the F that makes the F an ascending second. We also see the mordent over the F occurring, like Bach says it does in the previous paragraph, in the middle, and the mordent over the C occurring over a full cadence and what could be the end of a piece. I'll just quickly read some of paragraph 11 from the chapter on appoggiaturas in reference to how that B appoggiatura is to be played. Nach der gewöhnlichen Regel wegen der Geltung dieser Vorschläge finden wir, dass sie die Hälfte von einer folgenden Note, welche gleiche Teile hat, Figur 5a, und bei ungleichen Teilen B 2 Dritteile bekommen. So the B appoggiatura will get 2/3 of the value of the C. In the first example, the slurred notes or connecting, dieses verbinden, comes without appoggiaturas. And in the second, it comes with an appoggiatura. See how the word ordering matches the examples. You know, Bach said normally you'd think it would go with and without an appoggiatura. They come with and without, but Bach says without and with an appoggiatura, and it seems like that the word order is backwards, but that word order that he picked matches the examples, the order with which they appear in the examples. So you can see how the text and the examples are coordinated. The purpose or the function of the mordent in such situations is to hang the notes together. So this is what we can be striving to achieve when practicing the ornament in such situations. We can be asking ourselves, does it fulfill its function? And we now know what Bach considers its function to be in such situations when we come across them. When we know why we are doing something, we can then gauge when we're doing it properly, because it'll be when the goal is achieved or when the need has been satisfied. That too makes us less of a slave to rules, or less of a slave to one way of doing something. If you find another way to achieve the same goal, you've done that because you know what the goal is that you're looking to achieve. If you're only told, so if we don't know why we're doing something, then as far as doing it properly is concerned, it's a stab in the dark. One guess is as good as another. You know, are you following the rules? That'll be the gauge as to if you're doing it properly when you don't know why you're doing with something. That's why people who don't know why they're doing things, who follow dogma just, without any insight, that's why they can never think outside of the box. It's when you know why you're doing something, you can think outside the box. Like you might be told you only ever hold a saucepan by the handle. And if you don't know why, you're always like, you'll only ever grab a saucepan by the handle. But if the reason why is so you don't burn yourself, for example, well then you can wear oven gloves and then grab the saucepan differently, and you still achieve the same result. You don't burn your hands, but you didn't have to follow the rules. And so you can ask yourself, does it hang the notes together when you're, and just to put that in more context, I'll read paragraph 18 from the introduction to connect to that, and it'll add more context to what I'm saying. Als denn gehe man das Kapitel von den Manieren fleißig durch und übe solche, damit sie in gehöriger Fertigkeit geschickt herausgebracht werden können. Und da dieses eine Aufgabe ist, woran man beinahe zeitlebens lernen kann, indem diese Manieren zum Teil mehr Fertigkeit und Geschwindigkeit erfordern als alle Passagen, so halte man den Scholaren damit nicht länger auf, als bis man wegen dieses Punkts mit seiner natürlichen Fähigkeiten und Jahren zur Not zufrieden sein kann. So it's an ongoing process. So Bach then went on to say that outside of the ascending second, that the connecting also occurs via appoggiaturas. These are the corresponding examples to that. The first shows an upward leaping note. So it's an example of such a leaping note as was mentioned in paragraph 4. And the next example shows an example of such downward leaping notes that Bach in the previous paragraph said doesn't occur that often with Mordents. So he said they don't occur so often with downward leaping notes, and here he provides an example of them occurring with downwardly leaping notes. And paragraphs 18 and 19 from the chapter on appoggiaturas can be connected to this. Alle diese Vorschläge, nebst ihren Abzügen, wenn sie zumal häufig vorkommen, tun besonders bei sehr affektuosen Stellen gut, indem der letztere oft mit einem Pianissimo gleichsam verluscht. Figur 14. Bei anderen Gelegenheiten aber würden sie den Gesang zu matt machen, wenn sie nicht alsdenn entweder die Vorläufer von lebhafteren Manieren wären, welche die folgende Note bekommt, oder selbst noch einen Zusatz von anderen Zieraten annehmen. Deswegen trägt man die folgende Note gerne simpel vor, wenn sie einen ausgezierten Vorschlag gehabt hat. Diese Einfalt wird durch das gewöhnliche diesen Noten zukommende Piano glücklich erhalten. Ein simple vorgetragener Vorschlag hingegen leidet gerne eine ausgezierte Folge. Wegen des letzteren Falles beziehe Figur 15a und wegen des ersten B. Based on that, one could guess that the appoggiaturas, with the forte and piano expression they create, justify or validate the mordents over the downward leaping notes. And that if those Cs hadn't been appoggiaturas, that the mordents might not fit so well or suit as much. I.e., Bach is telling us with an economy of words where mordents over downward leaping notes can occur or might occur. That is the synergy I'm talking about. It's there for those to be seen who are paying attention. Those others who have an alternative agenda than wanting to find the true way to play the piano. They're not going to spot that at all. And you know, those with the alternative agenda, they are your roll of honor. Yeah, so he's showing where the mordent can occur over downward leaping notes together with when they're coupled with the appoggiatura, and why he explains it there in paragraph 19. Then Bach talks about figure 73a. Basically, he is saying in so many words that a mordent over an appoggiatura from below that has been coupled with an upward leaping note gets a long mordent in order that the appoggiatura gets the necessary emphasis. And one could perhaps extrapolate from that if the mordent, that if the principal note isn't sufficiently long enough, then such an appoggiatura shouldn't have a mordent at all, but rather the note following. That's potentially something that one can read out of that. That this emphasis given with the long mordent, the way Bach says it, is needed. And yeah, and if it's not sufficiently long, well, maybe the appoggiatura should be just an appoggiatura, and if one wants, one could then give the note following the appoggiatura. You know, you can extrapolate for yourselves from that, but this is just what I've read into it. You can agree with it or you can disagree with it after you've read into it yourself. Because this is what I'm promoting here. I'm not asking anybody to believe me. I'm asking people to consider it and then agree with me. And I say agree with me because eventually people are going to have to agree with the correct answer. But make sure before you agree, make sure it is the correct answer. And unfortunately, people have not been doing that with the roll of honour. And that's why it's gotten into such a state as it is now. And the biggest victims of that are the true musical souls. The people who are able to, play the piano like a machine, who have an insensitivity to music. They're not at all affected by all these things. It doesn't matter. But and that's the real crime, is that it's the true musical souls, the people who are sensitive to music. They are the biggest victims of the roll of honour, because all these things affect them the most. We can see that Richter has incorrectly indicated a short mordent. Either they didn't read the accompanying text, or they weren't able to comprehend it. They're native German speakers. They really have some neck telling us to replace the word before with the word after. But maybe that was the last of their mistakes, the champions of the roll of honour. And maybe I won't be pointing out the next of them in the next two batches of examples. Maybe we won't be seeing more mistakes. Do you see how you can be led astray if you rely on the roll of honour? If you skip to their examples for the quick answer, like if you're looking at what they transcribed for a quick answer and you're looking for like a certain situation and then you see it there and you read it, they don't even transcribe the things accurately. They tell you to change the text, and yet when the text tells them, highlights the mistake, Richter, don't indicate this with a short mordent, indicate it with a long mordent. I'm talking about a long mordent in the text. Write a long mordent in the example. They don't do it. Bach says that the mordent in this case connects and fills at the same time. I would say that the long mordents in bars 7 and 18 of the Largo Maestoso as well connect and fill simultaneously. Finally, he says such an instant tends to sometimes occur in recitatives. The role modulation plays in recitatives can be taken into account in connection with this too, I'd suggest. And you never know when you might encounter a recitative with this in it. But if you keep it in mind, enough that it at least rings a bell, you might end up correctly expressing what the roll of honour will have guaranteed gotten wrong. But it could be as well that you'll have roll of honour people going, oh no, you're doing it wrong, because you're not doing it the way, they know how to do it. And that'll be a hassle. But what would you prefer at the end? To be the one doing it right, or to be with the crowd doing it wrong? And it's all cool to be in the crowd until they're pointed out, they're exposed, and all of a sudden the crowd is not at all cool, and nobody wants to belong to the crowd anymore. And before I read the next paragraph, I want to read paragraph 15 from the chapter on the brace, because I think it can be connected to the paragraphs 18 and 19 I just read out, and the use of the long mordent in bar 36 of the Allegro Siciliano e Scherzando, and the idea of the long mordent in general. Wir merken hierbei an, dass der Doppelschlag über einem Vorschlage nicht leidet, dass die folgende Note einen Zierat bekomme. Figur 56. Es sei denn dieser Vorschlag vor einer Fermate, wobei auch wegen des darüber befindlichen Zeichens länger gehalten wird, als seine Geltung erfordert. Die letzte Note von diesem Doppelschlage wird unterhalten, dass man also ohne Ekel gar wohl nach einem kleinen Zwischenraume in den darauf folgenden langen Mordenten hineingehen kann. So this is another clue to long mordents. And again, Bärenreiter got the sign wrong. Der Mordent nach einem Vorschlage wird nach der Regel des Vortrags der Vorschläge leise gemacht. We can see Bach alluding to this with the piano signs in the examples of figure 73. Again, this is the Bach I've learned to recognize, who takes care that the examples complement and complete the text, as opposed to the Bach of the Roll of Honour and their cage, who wasn't able to make the two coincide. Funny, isn't it? It's almost like we're talking about two entirely different, like I'm talking about two entirely different people. I'll read paragraph 7 from the chapter on appoggiaturas again, because just like Bach says it, ich glaube, dass man gewisse Hauptsätze nicht zu oft einschärfen kann. Ferner lernen wir aus dieser Abbildung zugleich ihren Vortrag, in dem alle Vorschläge stärker als die folgende Note samt ihren Zieraten angeschlagen und an diese gezogen werden. Es mag nun der Bogen dabei stehen oder nicht. Diese beiden Vorsichten sind dem Endzwecke der Vorschläge gemäß, als wodurch die Noten zusammengehängt werden sollen. Man muss sie also so lange, bis sie von der folgenden Note abgelöst werden, aushalten, damit sie gut binden. Der Ausdruck, wenn eine simple Note nach einem Vorschlag folgt, wird der Abzug genannt. And one last thing, I take that from the last thing he said there, that I'd wonder, do you call, so you'd call the note that follows the appoggiatura, he says when a simple note follows the appoggiatura, you call it the Abzug. So I'd wonder, when that note is decorated with a mordent, is it still called an Abzug, or is that no longer a simple note because it's been decorated? Because, yeah, so it's possible that it wouldn't be called an Abzug when that note is decorated, and it's only called an Abzug when it's not decorated. And so if you ever found yourself back in time, and Bach is talking to you and he says about the Abzug, you play an Abzug here, and then you go and you play the Abzug with a mordent, he'll go, oh no, what are you doing? And then, with that information, you could play just a simple note without decoration after it, and he'll go, good man. So just, if you're ever in that situation, it could come in handy. Okay, I'll leave it there, and I'll continue in the next. Thanks. Bye.